Then comes the real intervention, the PTCA, as you all know. In September 77, Andreas Grünzig did the first coronary angioplasty in Zurich, and that's how the whole story starts. You can see here the patient at the time of the angiogram and about the time now, and you can see the Andreas Grünzig, who was the operator with the OVA that has been built afterwards. The patient had a control angiogram several times afterwards. You can see 23 years after, as it's not so bad at all after simple angioplasty. And when you compare in September 77, 23 years afterwards, the results is quite good. So when I came in Switzerland back in 1980, there was a meeting of all procedures, PTCA procedures in the worldwide, in a meeting that Andreas Grünzig organized in Zurich. And if you look through the numbers, you can see that at that time, less than 1,000 procedures have been done worldwide. So mostly in Zurich, some in the United States by Mehler, and some others, but look how small the numbers are. And then he made this meeting in Zurich with the attendance of many persons that already started or wanted to start the PTCA, including Grünzig himself, daughter, sons, Judkins. I will not go through all the names. And at that time I was working in Lausanne with Professor Ziegler, but then I moved in Geneva in '84. And these two persons are very connected with Andreas Grünzig. One is Professor Rutishauser, who was his chief, and thanks to Professor Rutishauser, all this intervention could be done in Zurich, as he was in Zurich before. And the other guy is Bernard Meyer. Many of you know him. He was the first fellow of Grünzig and went to the United States with him, and then came in Geneva. So we did also kind of courses at that time in Geneva and tried to popularize the procedure. So Andreas Grünzig, unfortunately, had a plane crash and died October 27, 1985 in Atlanta when he was working. We were supposed to do a course with him in November 1985 to do 10 cases of PTCA for our course, like a small workshop. And unfortunately, you know, when it happened, I remember like today, the professor said, you have to cancel the course. You know, I said, but why? And then he said, but for him, the biggest problem was to cancel the course. For Grünzig, it was unfortunate, but at that time was things like this. Another guy who is less known in interventional cardiology, but has at least as much merit as Andreas Grünzig, is John Simpson. He was he's still cardiologist, but was an inventor, and he found the way to do the steerable guide wire. At the time of Grünzig, that was a balloon with a fixed guide wire on the top, was handmade mostly by Schneider Medintag, and he found the internal lumen where he put the steerable guide wire. So that was really a revolution, and since that time, really had revolutioned and facilitate the procedure. This intervention of PTCA was done in many patients in the years between 70s and 80s, and follow-up was not clear. This is from my PhD thesis that I did with my university in Belgrade, of first 500 patients done in Geneva. So you can see that the procedure was relatively successful at the first time, but there were many problems at the long term that after 1 year, only like 63% of all patients had only one procedure. And then there were some recurrence that was restenosis, and after 1 or 2 additional procedures, like 78% had success. All the others, like almost 30%, had some problems. So the PTCA basically had 2 drawbacks. One is the abrupt closure. That was a problem of the simple balloon angioplasty. And the other one is restenosis that was at that time 20 to 30%. So the Cardiology Society was ready then for something new, but nobody knew exactly what until Ulrich Zigwart had implanted the first stent, which is basically not a stent because it was not on a balloon, it was a septal-expanding device by Medivant. And we also used this device not in humans, but the Medivant company was a Swiss-made company that had worked with the different devices, and this one looked really promising for the abrupt occlusion. And then they said we also can use it for stenosis. So in Geneva we're very classical, we did not want to do human implantation, but Ulrich Zigwart was chief in Lausanne, and actually this is a real story. They nominate another guy as a chief, so he had to do something really very good that he can move from Lausanne in a very good condition. So this is the course he did in 1806 on stents. This is the patient that had during the course the abrupt occlusion, and then he implanted this stent. Also, Puel did one patient about a month ago, but that was also an emergency, and I think Ulrich Zigwart is really the one who did the most of the. You see the device, it is self-expanding, and you have to pull back the sheet and keep on the device in a place because it shortens a little bit. You see, he wanted to put the stent from here to here, but it shortened, so but still the result is very good. The patient is still fine so many years ago. And now we have this hemorrhagic complications because with the implantation of a metallic device, the anticoagulation treatment was very heavy, and you can see in the first years that the hemorrhagic complications were very, very high, like 12%, and some of you remember these patients that have bleedings everywhere after the stent procedures. So at the same time, the other devices started to develop, not only balloon catheters and the stents, but also other devices that, especially atherectomy devices, these are something that was very popular after the years 80. And you can see that many other devices have followed. This is the graph showing the years of in calendar years. This is new devices, and this is the number of procedures that increased with the time. So all these new devices have developed at the same time. One that is still in use is rotablator. This is a device of Morik Buckbinder, who is a guy originally from Lebanon, and he went to the United States. He first made some research first he did a catheter that was not successful at the time of Hartzler. It was called bookbinder catheter that had a tip that you can turn from down, but it was too difficult to turn, and you never knew which size it turns. And then he developed the rotablator and really earned a lot of money with this, and device is still in use. Other devices that are not in use any longer on a large-scale basis is like brachytherapy. This is for combat the stenosis, and all these DCA, directional or rotational atherectomy. There is some new orbital atherectomy that maybe now will be used. The problem with these devices that have a high rate of perforations. The death was really high, not only due to the device, but also because the procedure was, all of them were mostly experimental, and all these other, that if you make addition, it goes up to 10 to 12%. So other people try to modify the metallic stents. This is the stent, Palma Schatz is the first commercially available stent at the time. He had a small articulation in between here. So it was difficult to place. It was handmade on the balloon. You have to crimp it on the balloon, and then when you pull back the balloon catheter, it often stent stays where it is because it was manually crimped. So Dr. Colombo thought maybe he should cut the stent, and at that time was a big deal because industry did not allow you to modify the device. But however, he's a fine guy. He went to see the director of J&J and discussed with him, so we published this modified stent. So these are metallic stents at that time, You see, this is this Palmachat stent that was very rigid one, hand-mounted. All others have also hand-mounted, and only after the development of test stents, that was a real revolution. So if we look now for the situation of historical MACE analysis, the events that were due to percutaneous intervention, at the first time you can see the MACE rate combined all together at about 1 year was about 25% with PTCA only. With the bare metal stents it went down, but still made a plafond between 15 and 20. And so at 30 years of PTCA we had a dinner. So Uli Ziegler presented this, that with the development of first generation stents it is about 10%, and with the new stent that was still in investigational devices at that time, he predicted that it will be about 5%, but finally became true. These are only some of the persons that had benefited of the bare metallic and some with stents. I will not name them all together, but for example, Mother Teresa had one in India and one in the United States, and all the others you probably have followed the history. So a word about drug-eluting stents. The problem of bare metal stents was restenosis, basically, as you can see here, and the first stents that have been developed are sirolimus and tacrolimus eluting stents, and you see that the TLR, the target lesion hospitalization rate, really went down, and this allowed the industry to develop so many different stents, even for bifurcation, dedicated stent, even for trifurcation, some that never saw the light with the reservoirs. All that made a lot of history about investment, and many people wanted to buy shares, etc., including physicians, until year 2006, which was really a bad year for PTCA, for PCIs, because there was a CARIB study first, and then during the European Society meeting, there was Eduardo Kamensid who presented the data where he found that drug-eluting stents had very high incidence of MI, and this really made a big impact on cardiology society in general. And I remember I was sitting with Antonio Colombo in the auditorium, and he said, oh, now I will have to invest in other things. So he invested really in a vineyard and produced a great wine that basically started with this. And the other problem at this year was also the CARIB study, you know, that compared medical treatment with interventional treatment, and did not find a very big difference. So many people tried to go back to medical treatment, which of course never succeeded, fortunately. Many groups then started to evaluate the reasons why the stents have so many problems, and there is the whole ideology of strategies to improve the placement of the stent. For example, this group in Milan, they really started with IVUS and popularized this method to decrease the complications, and actually the acute complications, these are the first 1,000 patients from this center in Italy. You see that they are not very, very high, the mortality is not so high, and the need for emergency intervention is not so high. Of course, the restenosis and the repeat procedure, that's another story. That's due to technique of stents, but using IVUS and other imaging technique really is now very well appreciated, and I think in complex cases is a real good solution. So I would like just to say a word about other devices that has been used for percutaneous intervention. One is TAVI, the other one is the different PFO occluders. All two are really good clinical studies improving their use. Another one is percutaneous suture devices. people that have been fellows remember how difficult it was to do manual compression. Now it's really nothing to do with the old time, and diagnostic tools for evaluation of importance of coronary stenosis. One other procedure which I would like to mention is alcohol septal ablation, basically taught and done by Ulrich Ziegler. And I remember when I was in Lausanne in 1982, he explained me all this, that he should to alcoholize the septal. And I was not alone. We were 3 fellows, and none of us understood what he's talking about. He's really, until he did a patient in 1984, was published later on, only in a local Swiss journal. During angioplasty, he put a balloon and had the catheters of high fidelity catheters, and showed that when you inflate the balloon, the gradient goes down. And then he took him a long time until he did first cases, but fortunately they were all successful cases. I think this is one procedure that is really good and well appreciated. Other technical advances is imaging technique. You see how it was in 1905, and now there is developing and developing. This is in 84 that we had a biplane Siemens or Philips equipment, and now maybe in the future we will work out of the room. So if we go back in this beautiful lake of Geneva, we can see that many devices that have been developed and underwater, and the two that are always present are stents and PTCA balloon. So last minute I would like to dedicate to Belgrade School of Cardiology. These slides is as a complex. There are many persons. I will not name all of them. This one is almost 40 years old, and others are in a time, you know. But I would like to thank all of these people that really I had the pleasure to be with, and thank them for unconditional backup. Thank you very much.